Since the time of the Apostle Paul, the name Areopagus has often been used in Christian history to represent the intersection of Christian faith and culture. In first-century Athens, the Areopagus functioned as a philosophical forum for the exchange of ideas, and it was there that Paul first brought the gospel of Jesus Christ to Europe. Today, the Areopagus is an Atlanta-based Christian education ministry and study center that offers seminars, workshops, and forums on topics relevant to contemporary Christian life and ministry. The mission of the Areopagus is to equip and educate Christians to effectively engage our society with the life-transforming truth and love of Jesus Christ. To this end, we offer substantive courses along with workshops and topical forums that challenge Christians to live faithfully and consistently in accord with the principles and practices of a holistic biblical worldview. Founded in 2003 by Dr. Jeffrey Beshears, the Areopagus sponsors dozens of events each year in venues throughout the metro Atlanta area. The Areopagus sponsors 3 regular programs in addition to other special events. The Areopagus Seminar Series features courses for Christians who want to broaden and deepen their understanding of the Christian faith and contemporary culture. These seminars are offered at a nominal cost and are taught by gifted instructors who are experts in their field, and include topics in biblical studies, Christian history, apologetics, contemporary cultural issues, contemplative spirituality, and literature and the arts. The Areopagus Forum Series features lectures, debates, and other presentations by outstanding Christian scholars, authors, and activists. Forums normally include a formal presentation and an extended question-and-answer session, and offer Christians a unique opportunity to interact with some of the great minds in contemporary Christianity. Forum topics include Christian apologetics, history, science, philosophy, and contemporary social and cultural issues, along with reviews and critiques of significant books and documentary films. God in the Arts, Theological Themes in Movies and Music, is a cultural apologetic series that analyzes and critiques the social, political, moral, and spiritual content in films and popular music from both an aesthetic and a Christian worldview perspective. This series also includes a unique 5-part study, American History Off the Record. Based on a course that Dr. Beshears developed at Georgia State University, this series uses popular music of the time to analyze some of the key themes in American history from World War I and World War II through the 60s era. Thank you for attending this Areopagus presentation, and we value your involvement and support of this ministry. For more information on the Areopagus, please visit our website at www.theareopagus.org.
Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the first in our series of 4 Areopagus forums for this summer. Tonight, obviously, as you know, George Weaver will be speaking on the significant life, overcoming your fear of being unnoticed and forgotten. Next week, by the way, July 13th, we will have Paul Atkinson speaking on the Colson Fellowship Program, Developing a Comprehensive Christian Worldview. This is a program that I would highly encourage everyone to check out for its in-depth analysis of Christian worldview ideas and involvements. Following that, then, on July 20th, Donna Weeks will be speaking on my spiritual pilgrimage from the New Age to new life in Christ. Very much looking forward to Donna's presentation. And then we will finish this series on July 27th with Rhonda Thomas. Rhonda is the president of Truth in Education, and she'll be speaking on new threats to American education, what every Christian needs to know. So I hope you can join us for each of these. I think each one is extremely valuable. But this evening, of course, we're particularly privileged to have with us George Weaver, and speaking on his topic, the significant life. Now, many of you are familiar with George. George is an attorney. He got his JD degree from the University of Georgia, and the areas in which he has practiced include personal injury, business litigation, civil rights, criminal justice, and government liability. Now, from 1977 to 1981, George served as Assistant Solicitor General for the state of Georgia, after which he served for 4 years as Assistant Attorney General for the state of Georgia. And he's the author, of course, of the book that we'll be focused on primarily this evening, and that is The Significant Life, Overcoming Your Fear of Being Unnoticed and Forgotten. George has also written an update on that book entitled Significant Me, ? Our Need to Be Noticed and Remembered. Now, George has numerous law publications, perhaps of most interest, most relevance to many of us might be a publication in 1985 that he put out entitled Handbook on the Prosecution of Obscenity Cases in Georgia. He's spoken on that topic from time to time at the Areopagus, and certainly a topic that is perennially relevant and important. Now, since 1994, George has been a partner in the law firm of Holberg and Weaver. And George is married to Leanne Weaver. They have 2 children, Mary and Michael. And George is also a member of Johnson Ferry Baptist Church in East Cobb County. And again, it's a great privilege to have George with us this evening. So, George, nice seeing you, and very much looking forward to what you have to share this evening.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and it's good to be here. And so we will proceed to talk about the subject on the table. And just to confirm, you try to cut this off at what, 7:15, 8:15 or 8:20? You're muted, Jeff.
Yes, we can go up to 8:30 is fine.
Okay.
But
right.
Anytime between 8:15 and 8:30 will work just fine.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction. And some of you have heard this discussion before about the subject, this little book that I put together. The current title is Significant Me, Our Need to Be Noticed and Remembered. And let me start out by asking this question. How many of you grew up in the 1920s or 1930s? I don't see any hands. I didn't think you would admit that. Well, one person, okay. I didn't grow up then, but my mother did. And my mother learned to save everything and to extract as much value as possible from every item that was in our house. For example, a tube of toothpaste is never really empty until you squeeze it as hard as you can to get as much toothpaste out of it. And so what I want to do is try to extract as much value as possible from some basic teachings of Christianity, some value that you may not have thought about before. Now, none of the teachings of Christianity I'm going to talk about, none of them is new to you, but there may be some implications or entailments that you haven't thought about. And so this subject is one that I got into from some personal experiences. My first wife died of breast cancer 32 years ago. And before she died, in the last few months, when things were going downhill and we couldn't stop the disease, she said to me with tears in her eyes, she said, "If I die, I'll be forgotten." And I didn't know what to say. That was somewhat similar to an experience I had as a child. My father died when I was 10, and he was disabled before that for about 10 years. So my entire life, he was disabled before he died in 1961. So one question that came to my mind going through these experiences is we often hear about the desire and struggle that people have to leave a legacy or to attract attention or to leave footprints in the sands of time, that sort of thing. But a person who dies prematurely, it seems like they don't have an opportunity to create this thing called a legacy that so many people are in search of. So that those experiences started me down this road of thinking about this subject and putting together this little book. So I'm gonna try to share the screen with you and go through a PowerPoint. And then after we do this, you can ask me questions. So let me see how this goes. Just a minute. Okay, I hope you can see that. That is the cover of this little book. Now, what I mean by significance is the extent to which each of us is known or noticed, appreciated, influential, and will be remembered. And I'm using the term significance interchangeably with importance. So how could this help you? I just mentioned examples of people in my family dying at a young age. I think the subject we're going to talk about speaks to that circumstance. Also, let's say nobody notices your efforts. You clean the house. Let's say there's an ugly stain on the carpet in your wife's or your spouse's car, and you clean it, and your spouse doesn't even notice you did it. Does that make you insignificant or unimportant? You do the family taxes. Nobody notices. You don't get credit for something that you did. Even worse, somebody else gets credit for what you did. You feel disrespected. You don't get a Christmas card. No invitation comes to the wedding or party. Everybody has more Facebook friends than you do. You're cut from the team, or you're the last one to be chosen, or you finish last in the tournament. Maybe if a friend or family member gets into Harvard, or worst of all, somebody in their 20s starts a business and sells it for $10 million. That's the most, I guess, discouraging event that one could experience that might call into question whether you have any importance or significance. So each of us is apparently insignificant against the scope of space and time. The Bible is full of statements like this, Ecclesiastes 2:26. There is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days all will be forgotten. James 4:14, you're just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Psalm 103:15, as for man, his days are like grass. When the wind has passed over it, it is no more, and its place acknowledges it no longer. And probably the most painful thing about that Psalms passage is its place acknowledges it no longer. Think back, have you ever driven by the house you grew up in, or maybe the high school you went to, and those things are no longer there. They've been demolished and replaced by a shopping center. And there's nothing to reflect the fact that you lived there for 20 years or went to school there for 5 years. Now, human beings are not content with this picture of apparent oblivion. That's not true of animals. Job says in Job 24:20, the worm feeds sweetly till he is remembered no more. So what do people do in order to try to obtain significance or make themselves known, appreciated, influential, and remembered? There are a lot of things that people do, I think, if you reflect on it, and we do these things too, to try to obtain or achieve this thing called significance. Jesus says in Matthew 23, verse 5, he says, the scribes and Pharisees do all their deeds to be noticed by men, verses 2 to 5. And he criticizes them for that. And we'll talk in a couple of minutes about how the Pharisees would engage in religious activities in order to attract attention to themselves, like praying in public or sounding a trumpet when they gave alms or donations to the temple. Acts 8, 9 through 10 records that there was a man named Simon who claimed to be someone great. This is in Samaria. After Stephen was martyred, there was a certain man named Simon who claimed to be someone great, and they all were giving attention to him. And that's a pretty good, I think, window into the type of human activity that we're looking at. The Code of Hammurabi, Hammurabi said, this is over 4,000 years ago, in Segel, let my name be ever repeated. So this is a perennial need or desire that people have to be noticed and remembered. Bridget Bardot, if you're as old as I am, you may know who that is. If you're not, you probably don't remember Bridget Bardot, a famous French actress. She says, I am the only Bardot and my species is unique. Lady Gaga, we know who that is. I live for the applause, 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 the way that you cheer and scream for me, from one of her songs. She goes on, yes, we live for the fame, doing it for the fame because we want to live the life of the rich and famous. Charlie Sheen, the actor, all I wanted was to be liked, recognized, included. I didn't want to be just a face in the crowd. You don't want to be just a member of the public. You want to stand out and be noticed. Salvador Dali, the artist, the surrealist, said, the thought of not being recognized is unbearable. So what are some of the ways, I've given you some quotes here, what are some of the categories of activities that people engage in order to try to achieve significance or be noticed and remembered? One is to try to obtain or secure a position or skill that no or few other people have. And this could be getting your name on acquiring a title, like an academic title, or maybe if you're British, maybe a title in aristocracy, or a list like All-American or Who's Who. You can try to set a record. You can try to win a tournament. You can run for or seek office, and so forth. Here is an example from the Wall Street Journal of a contest where a person was selected for the title of Mrs. Asparagus. And there are food festival pageants where people can compete for these kind of titles. And at the bottom there, somebody else, or a couple actually, were named as Mr. and Ms. Kumquat. And when I was a kid, I remember that there was a contest in Georgia for the Peanut Princess. And of course, people can try to get their name under that first point there. People try to get their name in the Guinness Book of World Records, which has hundreds and hundreds of categories where they record a record for some kind of human endeavor. Everything from the longest hiccuping attack to the person who has done pole sitting for the longest period of time. I clipped an article many years ago where a person named Kenneth Crutchlow swam from Alcatraz to San Francisco Bay trying to set a record. And he said that he wanted to get his name in the Guinness Book, quote, even if it kills me. And there have been a few cases, I mentioned some of these in my book, where people have died trying to get their name in the Guinness Book of Records. The second category is to become part of something more permanent than you are. A credit, for example, obtaining credit for discovery, accumulating property. If you're at the bottom of the food chain, it may be just writing your name on the bathroom wall, or having, you know, a whole lot of children, like a Saudi prince. Here's a quote from a book called Research Fraud in the Behavioral and Medical Sciences. Quote, the fact is that almost all of those firmly placed in the pantheon of science, Newton, Descartes, Leibniz, Pascal, Huygens, Lister, Faraday, Laplace, or Davy, were caught up in passionate efforts to achieve priority and to have it publicly registered, close quote. In particular, you may have heard that Sir Isaac Newton and Leibniz had a huge battle about who should receive credit for discovering the calculus. Apparently, the histories I've read have said that they seem to have come to the conclusion that this was a valid mathematical system about the same time, but they came to it independently, but they fought each other over who deserved credit. Eponymy, or the practice of naming something for a person, is common in most literate human societies. This is a way that people try to preserve their name in order to achieve what looks like significance. Here is a little collage of places that are named for people that you've probably heard of or seen many of these. I'll just let it run for a minute. You can watch it. Now, the Phillips screwdriver there is named for an engineer named Phillips, but nobody realizes that. Nobody thinks of Mr. Phillips when they use a Phillips head screwdriver. That was Henry Phillips who invented the Phillips head screwdriver. And the Woodruff family, I'm sure you know, Robert Woodruff was the president of Coca-Cola. and built the company into an international business. Here are some more examples. We'll come back to Grant Park in just a minute.
Get it out, buddy.
Now, Walmart's named for the Walton family, Sam Walton. Emory Winship Cancer Center is named, Winship was the name of Robert Woodruff's mother. Her last name, maiden name was Winship. So that's where that came from. The Woodruff family has provided a huge percentage of the endowment to Emory University here in Atlanta. And here's one more example. This is a toilet stall named for John Hosey. Now, let me go show you that again. Mr. Hosey was a professor at what's now Kennesaw State University. At that time, it was Southern Polytechnic. And there was a toilet stall named for him. I think that was to some extent a joke, but it still illustrates the point. Another interesting activity that people engage in is naming a star. There are businesses and websites you can go to that will sell you a piece of paper that says that a star is named for your loved one, somebody in your family who may have passed away. And you can choose from custom, deluxe, ultimate, and the price of these things can go as high as $400 or $500. What's interesting is that the names have no scientific validity. There's something called the International Astronomical Union that really maintains the names of stars, but you can get a certificate that says that at a certain coordinate, there's a star named for your loved one, and you pay money for that. You get a piece of paper, you can frame it and give it to somebody for birthday or Valentine's Day. Here is a pin. This was being sold on eBay at one time, that is supposed to contain a copy of Abraham Lincoln's DNA. And the price was $1,650. And this is an example of trying to associate yourself with a person who appears to be more famous than you. You've heard of perhaps the activity called burging, basking in reflected glory, where you don't feel that significant or important, but then you wear a t-shirt or a hat or buy a pin that seems to be connected to a person more important than you are. Another category of activities that people pursue because of this fear of not being known or noticed and being forgotten is they try to preserve their personal lives, group history, and culture by accumulating property, again, using graffiti or having a lot of children. Those are just some examples. Robert Shields was an elderly retired minister and teacher who lived in Dayton, Washington. For 25 years, he spent 4 hours each day writing a minute-by-minute diary of all of his activities. His diary is considered to have set the record for the world's longest diary, 37.5 million words, and filled 94 boxes when he died. According to a National Public Radio report that I heard, he spent his life savings to endow Washington State University in Spokane to house his diary after his death. And in this diary, if you look at it, it's got every time Mr. Shields went to the bathroom, he recorded that in his diary. He recorded every piece of food he ate, every phone call he got, every conversation he had, every piece of mail that came to him. he put all this into his diary. Another type of activity, unfortunately, that reflects this struggle and desire for significance is crime. You can see it in arson, vandalism, assassination, some of these mass shootings we hear about, unfortunately, all the time. In the Journal of Forensic Sciences, March 1999 issue, the authors say, quote, assassination and assassination attempts directed at public figures in the United States have usually been driven not by political motives, but by the desire to achieve notoriety or fame. And some examples they talk about are Lee Harvey Oswald, who, of course, shot and killed John Kennedy. The example that's probably most striking is Arthur Bremer. Arthur Bremer shot and paralyzed George Wallace in 1972. Wallace was running for president, and he was campaigning in Maryland. So Arthur Bremer, who seemed to have no political motives at all or any political ideology, he shot Wallace, and he kept a diary before he did. And in his diary, Wallace or Bremer, he tracked his activity. And he at first wanted to shoot Richard Nixon, who was president in 1972. And he actually followed Nixon into Canada. But Bremer never could get close enough or get past security to be able to take a shot at Nixon. So he settled on Wallace. And this is what Bremer says in his diary before he shoots Wallace. He says he's not sure that Wallace is a good enough target because, quote, I won't even rate a TV interruption in Russia or Europe when the news breaks. They never heard of Wallace. If something big in Vietnam flares up, I'll end up at the bottom of the first page in America. The editors will say, Wallace dead, who cares? He won't get more than 3 minutes on network TV news. And in the little book I have, I give a number of other examples of how people engage in extreme antisocial behavior because they don't feel like they have any importance, and they feel like this is a way to make themselves important. It's like they can sort of steal the fame of the person they're attacking. And a lot, like I said, of these mass shootings, I think, exemplify that. And seeking fame and attention, we talked about that. When it comes to fame and attention, there are websites and there are businesses that will actually create or engineer an event that presents what you could call pseudo fame. For example, there's some businesses, and I've got some citations in the book, that will hire people, pay them money to follow you and take your picture and ask for your autograph. And apparently, at least at one time, I hope this is still not true, at one time, some wealthy parents would set up these things for their 16-year-old daughters for their birthday. And as a part of the package, this paparazzi event, they would print up a newspaper, a fake newspaper with a picture of the young person on the front of the newspaper, like a tabloid newspaper. So there are miscellaneous activities too. And I mentioned earlier how the Pharisees and the scribes would engage in religious activities in order to attract attention. And I mentioned that they would sound a trumpet when they gave alms, or they would pray loudly in public, or when they would fast, they would make sure that people knew that they were fasting. And of course, Jesus says that all of that is really useless, that when you pray, you should go into your closet and pray only to God, not so people can see you and hear you. So those are some examples of the things that people do. We all have done them, I'm sure, to try to attract attention and to be remembered. Now, what are the effects of this? There are negative effects. I think these efforts always fall short. They really don't achieve their intended purpose. So unhappiness, excessive competition, you see other people as a threat to your significance, envy and jealousy. In 1 Samuel 18, Saul, it records that Saul was jealous when the women sang, quote, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Now, this is after David had killed Goliath. And so the women praise David over and above Saul. And Saul was resentful and jealous of that. Now, this competition for significance can obviously lead to this sort of reaction. Now, do these efforts succeed? Is it possible really to achieve this goal of significance or importance by trying to make a name for yourself? Let's say you give $1 million to a university to name a building for you. Does that really make you important? And as we'll see in a moment, I think it's those kinds of activities are fine. I think they should be lauded, but that's not really the source of anybody's significance. The fact that you have something named for you, or everybody knows who you are, or people applaud when you walk into the room. Again, Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, there is no remembrance of the earlier things and also of the later things which will occur. There will be for them no remembrance among those who will come later. So now Ecclesiastes is somewhat difficult to interpret, but I think that is an accurate statement, that all of the activities that we engage in that we think are going to cause us to be recognized and remembered, really, it all fades away. One of my favorite examples is Haman in the book of Esther. If you look at Esther chapter 5, Haman was the man who was second in command under King Cyrus. Not Cyrus, but was it Artaxerxes? Anyway, he was a very high-placed official in ancient Persia, and Haman wanted everybody to bow down to him when he walked by, and give him, adulation. And it records in Esther chapter 5 that when Haman saw that Mordecai, this was the uncle or the cousin of Esther, did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. So Haman sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh Then Haman recounted to them. Now, this is typical of human behavior. If you want to reinforce to people that you really are important or significant, these are some of the things that people do. Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches. In other words, I've got all these assets, the number of his sons, I've got this huge family, and every instance where the king had magnified him and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come to the king to the banquet which she had prepared. So now he's bragging about his honors. But then it says, and this is what's so significant to me or telling, at the end of this passage in Esther 5, Haman says, yet all of this does not satisfy me. So I've got, these assets, I've got this big family, I've got these honors, but this does not satisfy me. And that's when, of course, he wanted authority to annihilate the Jews, and Esther intervened. But I think this illustrates the fact that these efforts, these all too common efforts we engage in to try to attain significance or importance really don't, at the end of the day, achieve their purpose. You probably have heard of the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. This is the husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Percy Shelley was a British poet, and in Ozymandias, he talks about the lack of permanence of human achievements. And he's talking about a monument. Historians think that he's talking about this monument here, which is in the British Museum in London, of Ramses II, who I think his reign ended in 1213 BC. But here's what Ozymandias, the poem, says. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias. Again, they think this is Ramses II. King of kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Now, what Shelley's talking about is that when this monument was found, all of the civilization that Ozymandias was king over had disappeared. There was nothing left. There was just this broken monument, monument, a bust. Now, there's a book that I read in writing my little book called Anonymous. And it talks about the fact that when we name something, it could be a geographical feature, it could be a human artifact like a bridge or a highway, or it could be a building, or it could be a concept or a tool, like I mentioned, Phillips head screwdriver. That we do that thinking that this secures the memory of these people. But the author's thesis here is that usually when we do this, we name things for people that down the road in the future, nobody remembers the source of the word that's supposed to supposed to refer to the person for whom the thing is named, the eponymous word. I mentioned Grant Park earlier. Grant Park in Atlanta was named for a Confederate colonel named Lemuel P. Grant. And most people probably think that it's named for Ulysses Grant, which is very unlikely in Atlanta. Just like you don't find too many kids in Atlanta named Sherman because of General Sherman. So that's an example of how the connection between the object and the person for whom it's named is broken over time. The other picture on the screen is a highway sign for Outer Bridge Crossing. That is a place, a road in on the fringes of New York City, and nobody knows. And this comes from that book, Anonymous. Nobody knows that it's named for a person named Harvey C. Outerbridge. And people in New York think that it just refers to the fact that it's on the outskirts of the city. So again, the connection between the thing, the name, and the person for whom it's named is broken. And many of the most famous monuments that we are aware of, we have no idea who created them or what the history is, or even often what they mean. These are the Easter Island statues, Stonehenge, the Mayan temples, and so forth. So what is the real source of human significance? I think it is the teachings of Christianity. Now, obviously, for a person to benefit from this, you would have to accept or believe that Christianity is true. But there are four sets of teachings of Christianity that I think collectively add up to full or complete significance for every individual person. First, we're all made in the image of God. And of course, Genesis chapter 1 states that to be the case. In Matthew, Jesus says that let me just go to the next slide here. Jesus says in Matthew that people are more important than sparrows. That's Matthew 7, Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 12 says people are more important than sheep. The second set of teachings of Christianity that have to do with our significance is the fact that we're known by the omnipresent, eternal, and omniscient God. Matthew 10, 30, and 31 says, the hairs of your head are all numbered, therefore do not fear. Hebrews 6:10, the author says, God is not unjust so as to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward his name in having ministered and in still ministering to the saints. The inscription on the tomb of the unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia says, here rest in honored glory an American soldier known but to God. And that reflects the hope, I think, and belief that we have that God knows who everybody is, even the unknown soldier buried under that monument. And the last thing on this slide is a quotation from a song, He Knows My Name. Quote, he knows my name, he knows my every thought, he sees each tear that falls, and he hears me when I call. Tommy Walker. So that's the second source, I think, of the importance of the individual person, the fact that each of us is known by this God, the Christian God, who is omnipresent, eternal, and omniscient. God is everywhere in space and time, and he knows all about us. So I don't have to take a monument of me and put it on some island somewhere or in downtown Atlanta in order to be known by God, in order for some person to know who I am. A third category of teachings of Christianity that I think relate to the importance of individual people is that God reacts to individual humans, to every person. And in some religions, that's not the case. Of course, in Buddhism, there is no personal God. In Islam, God is completely transcendent, doesn't really interact with people. In fact, I understand that in Mecca, there's an inscription that says, God is not a father and he has no sons. These are ways that the Christian God, Yahweh, interacts with people, answers prayer, responds to faith, rewards righteousness, and punishes sin. A fourth teaching of Christianity that relates to our importance as individual people. Just one second, I lost my screen there. A fourth teaching of Christianity that relates to the importance of individual people is that individual humans live forever. You could still think, well, I'm not that important if I'm made in God's image, because all the people who've ever lived on earth were also made in God's image. So if I didn't exist, there would be nothing less than there is now. And then if I only believe that God knows all about me, that could still leave me somewhat empty. And even the fact that God reacts to me as an individual person could still make me feel like I'm not that important. But individual humans live forever. There have been theologians and philosophers under the who call themselves Christians, like Charles Hartshorne, a process theologian, who argued that there is no life after death, and that the memories that you make in your life, that constitutes some kind of equivalence to life after death or everlasting life. Now, that's not the Orthodox Christian position. I think Orthodox Christianity says, and we're taught, like in 1 Corinthians 15, that individual humans will live forever. So if you add all this together, I was going to say about the individual humans live forever. Paul actually says in 1 Thessalonians 4 that the fact of the resurrection, that we should use that to, quote, comfort one another with these words. So I think it is a source of comfort. Now, what are the consequences or implications of this? First, I think our significance is complete. We can't add to it or subtract from it by what we do. Number two, the length of life does not affect significance. So a person who dies young, like my first wife or my father, or last Saturday, my wife and I went to a funeral in Dunwoody for a 22-year-old young lady whom my wife had taught in school, and she died of complications from COVID. Hard to believe. She was 22, was not married, didn't have children, didn't have a career. But I would argue that based on the teachings of Christianity, she was just as significant as somebody who lives to be 100. You may be aware of the verse in Psalms, a day in your court is more valuable than 1,000 days outside. A third implication or consequence is that popularity is unimportant. So the person who attracts the most attention, the person who everybody knows when that person walks into the room, the person who has 1 million Facebook friends or 50 million followers on Twitter is no more important than the person who doesn't even use social media. We should also treat people equally because everybody is equally significant or important. Everybody's equally made in God's image, known by God. God interacts with everybody on an equal basis, and everybody will live forever. Records are not essential. So the person who comes in second in the race, or at the Olympics, the person who comes in fourth and doesn't even get a medal, a gold, silver, or bronze medal, is just as significant or important as the person who came in first under the teachings of Christianity. I think also a consequence of the teachings of Christianity is that we're free to be humble and to love others. I can afford to let you go first. I can afford to put my interests aside and give to you or focus on your needs and desires, because I don't have to build a legacy for myself in view of the teachings of Christianity. And we're also free to enjoy the purpose of life. Paul says he's determined to know nothing except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And he considered all of his accomplishments in Judaism to be rubbish. And I don't think anybody could have that attitude unless they believed that their significance was secure and it's not something they have to achieve through building a legacy. Now, I don't know if you can see, I'm having trouble letting you see the caption at the top. I don't know how to get rid of that.
We see it, examples of useful fame.
Yeah, there's a line at the top. Is that interfering in your vision?
No.
Okay, all right, good. Okay. Examples of fame, useful fame or history approved by Scripture. In First Kings, Solomon, it records that the Queen of Sheba came to see Solomon because he was famous concerning the name of the Lord. And he answered all of her questions, according to the account. Well, that passage says he was famous concerning the name of the Lord. So Solomon's fame was used to promote God's glory in that account. In the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, the second point here on this slide, the woman who anointed Jesus with the alabaster vial of costly perfume, Jesus said that, quote, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her. And we're not sure who she was. Some people think it was Mary Magdalene, but that's not clear. So anyway, that's an example again, as in Solomon's case, of fame being used for the purpose of glorifying God or worshiping God, not promoting a human being. Mark chapter 12 records that the woman who gave the mite at the temple, and whereas the rich people were giving larger amounts and attracting attention as they did so. And this woman who gave this small amount, but all she had, Jesus says she gave more than all the others. But we don't know who she was. We don't know her name. Her name is not recorded in history. But her example is recorded, not her name, but her example, like the woman who anointed Jesus with the perfume. Now, in 1 Chronicles 29, there is the account of David calling attention to the children of Israel for his gift toward the construction of the temple. If you remember, David did not build the temple, Solomon built the temple. But David, in 1 Chronicles 29, is recorded as telling the people of Israel how much he was giving in order to encourage them to give. Now, this is another example, I think, of fame being directed toward a glorifying God and not just toward human ego. The purpose of his describing his gift to the children of Israel was not to promote his ego, but to encourage them to give to the building of the temple. And there are other examples of fame being used for the glory of God. Memorial to crossing the Jordan in Joshua 4. John the Baptist attracted a lot of attention. It says in Mark chapter 1 that all of Judea and all of Jerusalem came out to see him baptizing in the Jordan River. I'm sure that's hyperbolic, but when John was asked who he was, he pointed to Jesus. And he said he was not worthy to untie his shoelaces. So John the Baptist used his fame to glorify God, not to promote himself. The last point on this slide refers to some Psalms where the psalmist is discouraged because it looks like God is not interested in or active in these circumstances. And in each case, Psalm 13, Psalm 22, Psalm 77, there are other examples too. The history of God's deliverance of Israel, like the Exodus from Egypt, is pointed to in order to encourage the faith of the psalmist. So history or fame is used there again for God's glory and not for human glorification. So I'm trying to get to the next slide here. It seems to be frozen. Hold on. So just to emphasize the point, all people are fully and equally significant. Think about some of the most famous names in history: Napoleon, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. Compare them to some people who are unknown or very obscure. I mentioned the unknown soldier. We don't know who it is in Arlington, the tomb of the unknown. Elmer McCurdy was a bank robber in 1911 out west. He was killed trying to commit a robbery. His body was unclaimed. Over the years, his body was shuffled around and ended up in a carnival in California, and nobody knew who he was or even that it was a human body. At one point, it was suspected it was a mannequin. You can look up this name, Elmer McCurdy, but a good example of obscurity. John Doe number one, that was a man who in 2002 in Atlanta, while exercising at Grady High School, fell and hit his head. And he had no identification, and he was taken to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. And 3 years later, he was able to talk, or not talk, but he was aware of his surroundings. He moved his eyes, but nobody ever reported it was a relative or a friend. So they referred to him in the news accounts as John Doe number one. He was unidentified. And that's not really especially unusual. People die every year across this country and around the world without identification. And often they're buried in what's called a potter's field. In fact, there's a cemetery in New York called Hart Island, which has over 1 million graves. And not all of those, but many of those are people who died with no identification, and they're buried there in these graves. And then the last name I have is Hiro Noda. This is one of the handful of Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender after World War II. And he was in the Philippines, and he did not come back to Japan after the war ended in August of 1945. And so he was declared dead in 1959. In 1974, he was found in the Philippines, still alive, brought back to Japan. So my point here is that all of these obscure people are just as important as the most famous people that we can think of because of the teachings of Christianity. They're all made in God's image. God knows all about them. God interacts with them on an individual basis, and all of them will live forever. Because we're running short of time, I'll skip over some of this. But Alexander Graham Bell, February 14th of 1876, he filed for a patent on the telephone. On the same day, a couple hours later, Elisha Gray filed for a patent on the telephone. And some people think Elisha Gray actually invented the phone before Bell, but he got to the patent office late. So we don't know his name, but we know Alexander Graham Bell's name. But under the teachings of Christianity, they're equally important. Paul Revere, we know his name from the famous poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, by Longfellow. William Dawes, the same night, rode throughout New England, around Boston, and carried the same message: the British are coming. But we don't know his name, but we know Paul Revere's name. But they're equally important under the teachings of Christianity. So the conclusion from C.S. Lewis. Paul, you mentioned this the other night when we had dinner. C.S. Lewis says, quote, "There are no ordinary people. You've never talked to a mere mortal," close quote. And I think that's the conclusion of this review of the teachings of Christianity and what they say about individual human significance. So you don't really need a monument to you. You're already fully known, appreciated, influential, and you will be remembered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Yes. And I read your book years ago. I went back through my underlinings a day or two ago just to refresh my recollection. Would you just briefly explain primarily what motivated you to write your book, The Significant Life, or of course that was the original title, but what what was it that kind of compelled you to write this?
Well, I mentioned at the beginning, seeing the lives of family members cut short before they had any chance to create what some people would call a legacy. Mm. No children. My father had 3 children, but he didn't have a career. He was disabled for 10 years and died at age 45. My first wife, Allison, did not have a career, did not have children. And so I became interested in all of the things that we do in order to pursue this goal of a legacy or significance. And what about those people who die young? Where do they come in? And it seems to me Christianity answers that question in a very strong way.
Yeah, and I had one more question, and then we'll just sort of open it up to others who want to ask questions and make comments. And I wrote years ago, after my mother died, I wrote a history of the Brashears family, the previous 11 generations up to mine, going back to the original French Huguenot immigrant to America in the 1630s. And do you see value in something like that? Either writing a family history or writing an autobiography. In other words, what would be kind of the downside of that, and what potentially could be very positive about it?
Well, I think that slide I showed a while ago of examples of beneficial use of history and fame, like Solomon and the widow's mite and David's gift toward the construction of the temple. I think those are good examples of how a record, a history, or a record can be used for beneficial purposes. But I would say that it's not necessary to the importance of a person that there be some kind of recorded history. Like, think about those people every year out west, it seems like, when they have these fires and somebody loses their home and all their pictures are gone. They have no pictures of the family. I think that's sad and tragic, but it's not like their families are no longer important because they don't have pictures or a record. But if you can use a family history to, I guess, promote unity in a family or encourage young people to do things that are productive and worthwhile, I think that's fine. But again, the point is the record or the history or the monument or the building that has your name or your family name, that's not the source of your importance. The source of your importance, I think, is, and you have to accept the teaching of Christianity, but if you do accept those teachings, the source of the importance of the individual person is those teachings, not these other things that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at the time I was motivated to write it, and I'd say inspired to write it, not just to pass on information that that has been preserved about previous generations, but there's a lot of there's a great spiritual legacy in that family history at all, and that was one reason for wanting to write it, is to for the benefit of our children and grandchildren and that is that they have inherited a great spiritual, heritage. So,
Well, I think that's a great purpose. Yeah.
well, let's open it up and questions, comments that you might have on George's presentation or the nature of his book. Just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or make a comment.
Jeffrey Bruce.
Yes, Bruce. Yes.
I kept thinking, George, I'm glad. Thank you very much, George. I had written down the C.S. Lewis quote long before you got to the end, thinking that if I didn't hear it, I'd have to contribute it. But you finished with it, which is exactly right. That's made a big difference in my life. But I also think, of course, that the Bible is probably significant, and those of you who may be more familiar with Scripture than I am, would say that the Bible would characterize self-absorption as a form of idolatry. Because, and to me, that definition is anything which comes between you and your relationship with God, and which, of course, overweening focus on oneself is pride. After all, they talk about as being the biggest sin. After all, the one that even the serpent, the one that the serpent had all of the sins of mankind to choose from and chose. Wouldn't you like to be like God? And so that's been a downfall of mankind. I don't know if you've given that much thought from the biblical perspective. You tend to take the positive side. This is kind of the negative side against self-absorption.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned in passing there toward the end, one implication or consequence of understanding, in my view, these teachings and extracting the value that they contain for us in our daily lives. One of those implications is, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:2, I've determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And he also says in 1 Corinthians 10, that whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. It's not really possible to live that way unless you feel like there's no urgency for you to make a name for yourself or get other people to applaud you. You can put all that aside for the sake of glorifying God if you understand the true source of significance. Cicero, the famous Roman politician and leader, he said at one point he was concerned about how long his fame would endure. And I mentioned this in my book. He says, in 1,000 years, how often will my name be mentioned in the marketplace? And what I want to say is that if Christianity is true, there's no need to have that concern. Nobody's going to talk about me in the marketplace in 1,000 years. I'm sure of that, but that's not necessary to my importance.
George, this is Mary. What I really liked about your book is that it truly always clarified we are made in the image of God. Truly, that I love that book. That is the overall theme I got. And then actually how you ended it too. I thought I had read a lot of C.S. Lewis, but I had never read The Weight of Glory. And after reading your book, it made me look it up, and I made multiple copies and I gave it to a couple of different people. And I don't know. You kind of like also to me gave a kind of a remote or maybe a less known article of C.S. Lewis out in the open. And I don't know, I just love that too.
Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You can probably think of examples in your life where there's a moment and this question is crystallized. Are you going to insist that you be first or let somebody else go first? And I think these teachings of Christianity allow us to let the other person go first because it doesn't threaten our true significance.
Mhm.
I'll give you one example. When I was at the Georgia Attorney General's office, I worked on a case, and this is the kind of crazy cases that would come up. An inmate on death row claimed that he converted to Islam and he wanted to have a beard. And at that time, Georgia, the prison system, this is the 1980s, had a rule against male inmates having a beard or facial hair. So we had a trial in federal court here in Atlanta, and it went on appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we won. I won. I had expert witnesses talking about the different factors involved, sanitation, identification of inmates, and so forth. And then when the published opinion came out, legal opinions are sometimes published in these books, these reporters, and it has the name of the lawyer who worked on the case. And my name was not there. Instead, it was the name of a different lawyer who didn't work on the case. And I remember when I saw that, I felt completely deflated. Like, in effect, this other lawyer who didn't work on the case had stolen my thunder. And then I reminded myself that my importance doesn't have anything to do with whether my name is in this book. Instead, it's based on these truths of Christianity.
I know David has a question or comment. David, you're muted, I believe.
I think I've turned off the mute. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Are you at all concerned that with this kind of a message, a young person would look at it and say, like, well, why should I do anything with my life? Because I'm already significant and I don't really need to do anything.
Well, that's a good question, David. I think, like the Apostle Paul, what the conclusion should be is, well, now I can afford, in view of these principles, I can afford to look after or promote or give attention to the interest of other people and serve the purpose of glorifying God. But to conclude that, well, I don't need to do anything, I can just, stay in bed all day and play video games. I don't think that's certainly not a good conclusion to come to, I think.
If I can also say, that's sort of the equivalent of a parent who, refuses to praise their child for getting good grades for fear that they will never try again. People tend to work the opposite way. If we feel like we're well thought of, then we want to do better. We want to live up to that.
Good point.
Yeah.
Well, again, Solomon, he was famous, but at least before he departed, I guess, in the last part of his life from following the commands of God, he apparently used his fame for the purpose of glorifying God. And I think that's a legitimate use of fame. You could actually try to get people to recognize you for some activity or achievement, and then use that recognition for beneficial purposes like glorifying God, which is, I think, what Solomon was doing in that passage I mentioned.
A couple of days ago on July 4th, I saw on TV one of these silly interviews, the man on the street, asking questions and whatever. And the interviewer asked this, looks like college age young woman, who was the first president of the United States? And she answered very assertively, Abraham Lincoln. And I remember thinking, I hope George Washington didn't hear that. Uh, so even among the rich and famous and those who have accomplished great things, as you've indicated, and your book certainly points out, how many people know much at all about Alexander the Great. I mean, they probably have heard his name, but most people probably don't remember him for anything in particular. And I think what really impressed me about your book, the first time I read it a few years ago, was your emphasis on the point that that God knows us. God knows us intimately, and that supersedes all other considerations. And presumably, we'll be well known in heaven. I don't know, but presumably that'll be the case. We'll be well known in heaven, as will everybody else.
Yeah, well,
there
C.S. Lewis
for all
says,
eternity.
C.S. Lewis says that in heaven, everybody's equally famous. I think that's the great divorce.
Everybody's equally famous. It's a good way to put it. Well, any other last comment or question before we close things out for the evening? Okay, well, George, thank you very much. Very informative. And those of you who do not have the book, have not read it, I would highly recommend it. It's a very, very thought-provoking book, and I think it really can have an impact on our own self-image and our sense of worth and purpose in life. So a very meaningful book, and I appreciate how I think you must have followed the Lord's leading in writing that book, and I know it's certainly had an impact, a positive impact on a lot of people. So thank you, George, and thanks for your presentation this evening.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll say one more thing. I hope I didn't write the book in order to attract attention to myself. That would not be a very worthy purpose. But if I did, I don't think that was my goal, but if I did, it wasn't very successful because I haven't sold that many books. But the ideas behind the book are, I think, of value, and hopefully that's what's come across.
Absolutely. And it is a perennially relevant topic. So I think there'll probably be plenty more people read it, in the years to come as well. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And very much looking forward to the presentation next week with Paul Atkinson, a review of the Colson Fellows program. So join us then, if you will. So blessings on you all, and remember that we all have infinite value in the eyes of God. And so let's carry on and do God's work with full vigor in this life, realizing that what we do is important in terms that we honor God and what he's called us to say and do, and the people whose lives we can certainly influence. So thank you all. Blessings. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you. Thanks, George.